Good morning, grade schools. Today I'm going to talk about the U.S. STEP study, and I'm going to talk about the Roaring Twenties. This is all of the excellent, wonderful, exciting things that happened in the 1920s. I'll make another video about the things that did not go really well. So go ahead and get out your piece of paper and a pen and pencil, and let's take a look at the Roaring Twenties. One of the big things that rose in the Roaring Twenties was Hollywood and the cinema. So it became a very iconic of what America was like in the 1920s. Many Americans went to the cinema a few times every week. The tickets cost very little. They were silent movies in the beginning. That's why I have here Silence is Golden. And they were accompanied by a pianist. So someone was actually in the front of the theater playing the piano while the movie is going on behind you. Now, the thing that made movies really great, not just for everyone, not just for the people, but for companies, there was also a lot of advertisement and things that were given up in the movies. So that you would see, to get your toaster there, or, to buy your vacuum cleaner, to go to your car. And so the movies basically just kind of took everything and rounded the entire American culture into a lovely bundle that everyone was able to do. Even poor people were able to save up money and be able to go to the cinema once or twice a month. So it was a really exciting thing for anyone that was in the city in order to join and see. So go ahead and pause and write those notes down. We'll talk a few more slides about Hollywood and the cinema. So why was the cinema so popular? So again, we've got advertising. And so advertising also made the actors important. So Charlie Chaplin, Rudolph Valentino, Gloria Swanson. Also, if you remember in the last video, I showed you an advertisement for a Coca-Cola. Actually, it wasn't Coca-Cola, it was just a cola brand, and it had Babe Ruth. So sports also, advertising made sports very important. Warner Brothers and MGM Studio, which is still around today, they used advertising and they tried to engage and get people to see things, or to want to go see things. It was also very cheap to go to the cinema. Like I'd said earlier, it's very inexpensive, so anyone can go see it. And people had more leisure time. So again, when we talk about this whole cycle of goodness going up, where factories could make more things, they could sell them cheaper because of the tariffs, or not the protective tariffs, but the taxes were lower, so then people could make things more profit and also sell things lower. People were able to make more money, and with that more money they were able to make more consumer goods, and the consumer goods again were cheaper because of the assembly line. And because people had these consumer goods like toasters, like washing machines, like vacuum cleaners, the people had more leisure time. And so what are they going to do with their more leisure time? They are going to go to the cinema, and they are going to go see sports events. And so that money then gets invested back into the companies, back into everything, and it continues to go better and better and better. And then in 1929, right at the time of the stock market crash, they invent something called talkies. And talkies were the first cinemas that people actually spoke. And so here the pictures I've got for you are from silent movies, and that is Charlie Chaplin. So make sure that you know at least one name per all of these exciting things that I'm going to be telling you about. And Charlie Chaplin is the name to know for cinemas in the 1920s. Okay, go ahead and pause and take these notes, and I'll move on to the next slide. So Movie Weekly, that is a magazine that you could buy for just 10 cents and read all about the movies and all about everything. So that is more of that advertising I was talking about. Everyone wanted to read that. That's something else they could do in their spare time. Instead of washing the clothes, a woman could read her Movie Weekly magazine and learn. So the celebrity culture was developed in the 1920s, and their whole lives were put under scrutiny. And that is exactly what we have now. The paparazzi stalking everything. Everyone that's a celebrity is really well known. People care about what's happening, and People were also thought that there was going to be lower moral standards. So they made some rules, such as about kisses. People who kiss on the screen could not last more than 10 feet of film, so a certain short amount of time. So that's what 10 feet of film means. That should be 10 inches of film. I'll have to check that fact. But basically, the whole point of that is that if you kissed on screen, it has to be a very short kiss and could not last for very long. And so that they're trying to make sure the moral standards were there. Also, there was a lot of scandals that had to be covered up by so that celebrities have, because of course they have a totally different life and everything. And it basically, between the flappers and the celebrities, basically opened up the eyes of a lot of people, and they weren't really sure about whether they liked the things that were going on. So anyway, it's a whole new idea of culture in America about whether or not what people could do, what was proper, what was not proper. Okay, so pause here and take these notes, and I'll move on to the next topic. Okay, jazz is another thing. So I was telling you, make sure you know certain things. Cotton Club is the #1 club, the most famous club. So I've got that written right here. Now, I know I didn't type all of this in here, but go ahead and write these down. If you wish to abbreviate, that is no problem. So, and I'll give you an overview of what all of this is. So first, let's talk about jazz, and I'll talk a little bit more about Louis Armstrong in the next slide. But jazz became a very important form of music. With jazz, also, people started dancing more, and that goes along with also the next one. The dancing, the Charleston and the Black Bottom were very popular dances. They were much faster, a lot of moving their bodies around. A lot of people thought that the dances were also not very moral, so we're back to that, looking at the celebrities and how they're acting and how the flappers act. And again, let's look at what is moral and what is not moral. That was very important in this time. Jazz, a lot of times, was performed by black musicians, although black people at this time did not have very many rights. That will be in my next video. So they're playing at these clubs that they're not necessarily allowed to even actually go to. So the Cotton Club, the musicians would enter from the back. The black people would entertain everyone, and then they would go out the back door, and they were not actually allowed to come into the Cotton Club itself and be patrons there. Again, I'll discuss that more in another video. Another thing that was very important was radio. So by the end of the 1920s, the majority of people had a radio. Unfortunately, I don't have the percent right here, but that is in your book, and that would be a good thing to look up. So you could just say lots and lots of people had radio, and those who did not have radio oftentimes went to their neighbor's house and listened to the neighbor's radio as well. And so people got used to listening to the music. They also had like we have TV shows, they had radio shows that were either daily or weekly that were produced, and people actually acted out like a play or whatever, and they would have sounds along with it. So that was very interesting. And later, this is the 1930s, not the 1920s, that we had the fireside chats done by Roosevelt. So, but that's always very important to know. But again, that was the 1930s, not the 1920s that happened. People had lots of fads and crazes and did lots of exciting things, and there were beauty contests and dance marathons, and there was the last thing, there were even live goldfish eating competitions. So anyway, pause here. I hope that gave you a good overview of what all that jazz is about. Please take a look at your notes. Write all this down using bullet points and really think about it. Okay, I'll go on to the next slide. Okay, so I told you I'd promise you Louis Armstrong. Here he is. He was the first important soloist in jazz, and he became the most influential music player in the music history. He is still known as one of the most important people in jazz. So here he is. He played the trumpet, but he also sang, and he had a very distinctive voice. So if you could go ahead and listen to a snippet of Louis Armstrong music, you'll hear about that. And with jazz, is just a fun, moving, exciting music. So it's not a very stagnant it's not stagnant, and a lot of the music people used to listen to was the old classical stuff, and then jazz comes around and really shakes things up, and people come and dance and have a lot of fun. So go ahead and take these notes down. Louis Armstrong is the person you need to know for jazz. Okay, so I've kind of talked about women already, but the women that really took it to extreme were called the flappers. There were the vamps who took it even to more extreme. The flappers just kind of went as far as they could go, but didn't make it worse than people wanted. Vamps, they went a little further and they went into the immoral side. But flappers are known from their dress, their style of dress. So this is very common. I've got one here. They also had very short hairstyle. In the past, women always wore long ankle-length dresses with long hair pinned up. They wore makeup, and they liked to dance. They also smoked, which was also in public. That was also a huge thing. So it was very shocking. You have to remember that the flappers started right after World War I, and the men were coming back, and the women had already gained some independence because all the men were gone, and the women were the ones keeping the society up. And the men come back, and the women are like, hey, I want, to be this way. I don't want to go back to being the mother that always has to, not have fun and everything. And the women wanted to keep their jobs. And then in the 1920s, women got the right to vote. Also, women had more independence because of that circle I've been telling you about already, the assembly line producing those products for the women to make their lives easier. Therefore, they could go see jazz, they can go to cinemas. They also changed their lifestyle. Women were also choosing who they wished to marry and what they wanted to do and weren't being told. Flappers could also be seen playing sports in public. So it was a whole new way of life for women. That was basically come out in the Roaring '20s. Go ahead and take these notes down, and we'll move on to the next page. So, I want to point out that not all women benefited from these changes. So I've got some pictures of other women in the 1920s, and you can see the 1920s clothing style, how it comes low, covers them up. A lot of people couldn't afford the lifestyle because poor people could not afford to go out and be flappers and buy all those toasters and have everything. A lot of women just stayed home and nothing changed for them, and a lot of ethnic women didn't change either. So we'll talk more about that in the next slide, but after talking about all of these great things, I really want to always stop and pause and say, how many people did the Roaring '20s actually change? Because everyone has in their idea the Roaring '20s a great thing, everything was great, everything was wonderful, but it actually wasn't wonderful for everybody. Okay, pause here, take those notes, and I'll go on to the next page. Okay, then we have prohibition. Prohibition is a very, very interesting topic, and I wanted to just explain some of the things before we go on and give you some details. Prohibition was introduced in January 1920s, and it banned the sale and production of alcohol. It's very important that you know that it banned the sale and production of alcohol because it did not ban the drinking of alcohol. Okay? You're allowed to sell it. You were not allowed to sell it. You were not allowed to create it, but you were allowed to drink it. So the idea is if you can't sell it and you can't produce it, you also couldn't drink it. But they kind of mess up there. So all these people right here in this club, they're drinking and they're actually legal because they were allowed to buy it and they were allowed to drink it. This man here is illegal because he was not allowed to sell it. So here what they did is they sent out task forces and they found all the alcohol being made and they just basically poured it out. Okay, so there are two main movements that started it, the Anti-Saloon League and the Women's Christian Temperance Union. Please know those two names when we're talking about prohibition. Okay, so what were illegal bars and illegal drink called? So they created something called speakeasies. That's what this is. This is a speakeasy. So it is two words, speak and easy. And what that refers to, when you go to a speakeasy, it is an illegal bar, so not everyone can go in. The only people that can go in are the people that know the password. So you knock on the door and they open up a little slot and they say, something, and then you give them the password, and they let you in. So that's speak easy. So quietly speak the passcode, and you can come in. And people made illegal drink in their, so they a lot of times made it out in the country and everything, and they were made in their own stills, and this was called moonshine. Now, moonshine was also some really high proof moonshine could be very deadly, and it could actually kill people. So we'll get into more of this later, but Prohibition actually hurt more people than it helped, but we'll go in that later. So in the rural areas were temperance, anti-alcohol movement stronger? Or where, in what areas? Sorry, I can't even read my own writing. So in the rural areas. So not in the middle of the cities, but out in the country. They had great support among women. Now you think, why would women be the ones supporting? Because the men are the ones going out and getting drunk all the time. So the women are thinking, if it's illegal, the men cannot go out and get drunk all the time. They would stay home and support everyone, or support the family and make more money. And the people who supported Prohibition were called dries. That's important to know, because in the next slide I'm going to be talking about dries. So go ahead and pause here, write this information down, and I'll move on to the next slide. So what arguments did the Prohibition supporters use against alcohol? So what were the dries saying? Okay, so they're saying 3,000 infants a year are smothered in bed by drunk parents, because back then infants usually slept in the parents' bed, and so they're saying when you're so drunk you can be smothered. Okay, World War I, drinkers were accused of being unpatriotic because most big breweries were run by the German immigrants. Because, of course, Germans are the ones who make the best beer. We all know that. And so the German immigrants were known as the enemy because Germany are the ones who caused World War I, as you can learn all about in the Chapter 1 videos. Dries, the people against the supported Prohibition, claim that drink caused lawlessness. So basically, if you drink and got drunk, you were more likely to go up and shoot people. Okay, drinking was said to encourage the spread of communism after the Russian Revolution. So we'll talk a lot more about communism and the fear of communism in the next video. But they're saying people who drink were more communists than people who don't drink. And then saloons were seen as the dens of vice that destroy family life. That's basically what I was saying in the last slide, that women basically saw that men would go out and they would drink, and that they would not take care of their families, and they were too busy being drunk. So those were the arguments that were for Prohibition, basically against drinking. Go ahead and pause and take those notes down. We have a couple more slides about Prohibition. Okay, so the question is, was Prohibition a success? And there are 3 points that say, yes, Prohibition was a success, and they make the word ale. And hopefully you know ale is a form of beer. Okay, so if you really are a ale connoisseur, you probably would say, no, that's not true, but for me, that's what it is in my mind. So the A stands for alcohol destroyed. So in 1929, 50 million liters of illegal alcohol was discovered and destroyed. So here's the last picture, also showed them dumping out that alcohol. Here's more pictures. So that's a lot of alcohol that was found and destroyed. So there was a legacy of Prohibition, that the actual consumption of alcohol fell, but not just during Prohibition, for many years after. So they're saying here that before there was really high levels of alcohol consumption. With Prohibition it dropped, and it stayed low for many years after that. Not until 1971 did the amount of drinking raise to the pre-1914 levels. So that's about 60 years that alcohol consumption was low. And I want to point out these 2 people, Izzy Einstein and Mo Smith. They were famous examples of police officers, Prohibition officers, that had the ideals. They were not corrupt. We'll talk about that just in a second. But they were good, moral standard, famous people, and people look up to how they worked. So when we're talking about names of people, Einstein and Smith are the 2 names you need to know that are for Prohibition, that they were good Prohibition police officers. So pause here and we'll go on to the next slide. So failures, damage would be your memory word, and I have half the page here and half the page on the next one. So drinking continued. Okay, so that's one of the failures. It was possible to enforce it. And also remember, the drinking consumption of alcohol was not illegal. It was the selling and the making of alcohol that it was illegal. So there was not enough police force. There was only 4,000 agents, and you've got the two names already of the two good people. And many of them, most of them, were actually taking bribes. So here is my favorite political cartoon. This is called the National Gesture. So this is your prohibition agent, your police officer, your politician, magistrate, so this is your lawyer, and I can't really read the rest of them. And they've got their hand out there behind the back. And the behind the back gesture is, you give me some money and I'll look the other way. I'll turn around, you put money in my hand, and I'll just walk away. So that became known as the national gesture. There were so many people taking bribes that was normal. It was not normal to be like Einstein and Smith, who were the good examples. It was a lot more normal to be like these politicians right here with their hands behind their back. And part of the problem with prohibition is alcohol was still available. Okay, the liquor trade just went underground. Like I told you about the speakeasies already, that's where the illegal bars. Moonshine, that's the illegal alcohol. And then bootlegging became the actual action of smuggling the alcohol from the illegally made to the illegal bars. And it made all the ordinary a lot of ordinary people, it made them become criminals. Now again, the people drinking are not the criminals, but the people selling it. Your ordinary bartenders became criminals. The ordinary people that make alcohol became criminals. Ordinary people that would transport it became criminals. So go ahead and pause here and take down those notes. We'll move on to the next slide, the rest of the damage. So we have three more things about why prohibition failed. So there was a lot of adverse effects. This is what I was telling you about earlier. Actually, a lot of moonshine killed people. It was very easy to make it too high proof, and people who drink it, they a lot of times were killed. There's a type of brandy called Jackass brandy. It caused internal bleeding. And Soda Pop Moon, it also contained poison in it. So there was a lot of effects that were not good for the people. So by making it illegal, they were no longer allowed to moderate it, make sure it was fine, make sure it was good quality, and it basically, people were drinking whatever was out there, and it was not necessarily good for them. And then gangsterism started. Here's Al Capone. I'm pretty sure everybody knows Al Capone. And so running an illegal trade of alcohol became very profitable. And so these gangsters, they came in. It became a lot of blood and violence, getting the alcohol to where it's supposed to go. A lot of people were killed. A lot of people had problems. Again, like I say, other people, they turned a blind eye with the national gesture. And actually, the amount of people that were killed went higher because of gangsterism than actually the alcohol itself killed. And finally, it ended in 1933. Prohibition was abolished, which means they got rid of prohibition. So it lasted 13 years. And so basically that proves that prohibition failed, because even in the end they had to get rid of it. And so that's the 21st Amendment. The 19th Amendment made it illegal. The 20th Amendment let women vote, and the 21st Amendment ended the alcohol. So hopefully that gives you some good ideas. I'll go ahead and take the rest of these notes down, and I'll go on to the next page. Okay, finally, I have sport. I kind of talked about sport when we were talking about sin and entertainment, and I wanted to make sure that you guys know the names of some of these people, because, like I said, it's very important to know the names. In baseball, Babe Ruth was the most popular person. He hit lots and lots and lots of home runs. That's what he was known for. And in boxing, Jack Dempsey was the most famous back then. So go ahead and write those down. Those are your highlights of the Roaring Twenties and what made it so roaring. I strongly suggest you take a look at that America 20th, 21st Century Timeline, the video I'll make you guys all watch. That video covers very well both the economics and the sports. So if you're reviewing for a test or reviewing for the coursework, go ahead and watch that video. You can't watch it too much unless you have it totally memorized. But if you have it totally memorized, you're probably enjoying it. So much information that you know can be taken from that video. Okay, so if you have any questions, let me know.